A Werewolf Shifter Romance, written by Amelia Hart. Chapter 1. Flowers from Ash. Sarah scrubbed the stone floor of the temple's great hall with movements that had become automatic over 21 years. Her hands, raw and chapped from endless work, moved the brush back and forth across stones worn smooth by centuries of feet. The water in her bucket had long since gone cold, mixing with the grime she was supposed to be cleaning away. But she didn't dare ask for fresh water. Not after this morning. Her ribs ached with every breath. The High Priestess Julienne had been particularly harsh today, and Sarah could feel the bruises forming along her left side where the woman's boot had connected. The crime? Sarah had entered the sanctuary chamber to light the morning candles. It was one of her assigned duties, had been for years, but this morning the High Priestess had been praying when Sarah arrived. "You dare profane this sacred space with your cursed presence?" Julienne had hissed, her voice cold as winter stone. "The goddess turns her face from you, and yet you walk where only the pure should tread." The beating that followed had been thorough and methodical. Julienne never left marks where others could see them. She was careful that way, precise in her cruelty. When it was over, Sarah had been sent to scrub floors until the evening bells rang, without food or water. "Where are you watching from?" Sarah thought. Not for the first time. "Do you see this, goddess? Do you care what happens to the girl they say you cursed?" The temple of the lunar goddess stood at the edge of the whispering woods, a massive structure of white stone that had weathered 300 years of wind and rain. It was beautiful in the way that cold things can be beautiful. Remote. Untouchable. The priestesses who lived here devoted their lives to serving the goddess, to maintaining the old traditions, to preserving knowledge that dated back to when the world was young and wild. Sarah was not one of them. She would never be one of them. She had been found as an infant at the base of the ancestral tree, wrapped in cloth so fine it could only have come from nobility, but with no other clue to her identity. The tree itself had been dead for 3 centuries, ever since the last Luna had been burned for heresy against the goddess. Some said the tree had died the same day the Luna did, that it screamed as the flames consumed her, and then simply stopped living. The priestesses had taken Sarah in, because it was their duty to care for foundlings, but they had never let her forget that she was different, cursed. A child left at the feet of a dead tree could be nothing else. "The goddess marked you the day you were born," Julienne had told her more than once. "Why else would your parents abandon you in such a place? They knew you carried darkness." Sarah had stopped arguing years ago. She had stopped hoping that things might change, that she might prove herself worthy of kindness. She simply survived, day after day, doing the work no one else wanted to do and staying invisible whenever possible. The evening bells finally rang, their clear notes echoing through the temple halls. Sarah's arms trembled as she dumped her dirty water in the waste channel outside the kitchen and rinsed her bucket at the pump. Her stomach cramped with hunger. She hadn't eaten since yesterday evening, but that wasn't unusual. The priestesses ate first, and Sarah received whatever was left. Sometimes that meant a heel of bread and watery soup. Sometimes it meant nothing at all. Tonight, when she entered the kitchen through the servant's door, she found Priestess Bet setting aside a covered bowl. "Quickly," Bet whispered, glancing toward the main hall where the other priestess were finishing their meal. "Before Julienne comes." Sarah took the bowl with shaking hands. Inside was real stew, thick with vegetables and chunks of meat. Her eyes burned with unexpected tears. "Thank you," she managed. Bet's weathered face softened. She was perhaps 45, one of the younger priestesses, and unlike the others, she had never treated Sarah with open cruelty. Small kindnesses like this were rare and precious. "It's your birthday, child," Bet said softly. 21 years today. You deserve something warm." Sarah had forgotten. In the endless sameness of her days, dates held little meaning. But Bet was right. 21 years ago today, someone had left her at the base of a dead tree and walked away forever. "Eat in the stables," Bet added. "Don't let the others see." Sarah nodded and slipped out through the kitchen door into the cold evening air. The stables were her home, such as it was. She slept in the loft above the horses, buried under old blankets that smelled of hay and animal warmth. It was cold in winter and sweltering in summer, but it was hers. No one bothered her there. She ate slowly, savoring every bite, trying to make it last. The meat was tender, the vegetables seasoned with herbs from the temple garden. It was the best meal she'd had in months, maybe years. When the bowl was empty, she set it aside and lay back on her pile of blankets, staring up at the rough wooden beams of the stable roof. 21 years old, an adult by any measure. Yet she had no more freedom than she'd had as a child. She belonged to the temple, would belong to it until she died. There was nowhere else for her to go. No family to claim her. No future beyond these walls. The despair that lived constantly in her chest rose up like a wave, threatening to drown her. She pressed her hands against her face, trying to breathe through it, trying not to let it consume her completely. Maybe they're right, she thought. Maybe I am cursed. Maybe there's something fundamentally wrong with me. Something that makes me unworthy of love or belonging or any sort of normal life. She must have fallen asleep because she woke to the sound of raised voices from the temple. Julienne's voice, sharp with anger, cut through the night. She has become too comfortable, too bold, entering the sanctuary as if she has any right to stand on sacred ground. Another voice, quieter, replied. Sarah couldn't make out the words, but she recognized Bet's tone. I will not debate this, Julienne snapped. Tomorrow she will be reassigned to the fields. Let her break her back in the sun where she cannot pollute our holy spaces. Sarah's breath caught. The fields meant 12-hour days of backbreaking labor. It meant exposure to summer heat and winter cold. It meant even less food, because she would be too exhausted to make it to the kitchen in time for scraps. It meant, quite possibly, dying slowly of exhaustion and starvation. Something inside her snapped, not with anger or defiance, but with a quiet, final resignation. She couldn't do this anymore. She couldn't survive another day of being treated as less than human, of being blamed for circumstances beyond her control, of being punished simply for existing. Sarah climbed down from the loft, her body moving without conscious thought. She walked past the temple, past the gardens, into the whispering woods. The moon was full overhead, casting silver light through the bare branches. She knew where she was going. She had always known, on some level, that she would end up here eventually. The ancestral tree stood in a clearing at the heart of the woods. It was massive, its trunk wide enough that 10 people holding hands couldn't encircle it. But it was dead, had been dead for 300 years. The bark was gray and cracked, the branches bare and skeletal against the night sky. Nothing grew near it. Even the grass seemed to avoid its roots. Sarah had been brought here as a child, when she was old enough to understand. Julienne had stood her in front of the tree and told her the story. This is where the last Luna died, Julienne had said. She defied the will of the goddess, claimed powers that were not hers to claim, and for her heresy, she burned. The tree died with her because it was tainted by her darkness, just as you are tainted. Standing here now, Sarah felt nothing but exhaustion. She was so tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of surviving. Tired of hoping that tomorrow might somehow be different. I'm sorry, she whispered to the tree, to the goddess, to whoever might be listening. I'm sorry I was born cursed. I'm sorry I couldn't be what they wanted me to be. I'm sorry I'm still alive when clearly I shouldn't be. She reached out and pressed her palms against the rough bark. The wood was cold beneath her touch, lifeless. Please, she breathed. If you're listening, if you care at all, just let it end. I can't do this anymore. I can't keep waking up to pain and rejection and emptiness. Please, just let me rest. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then warmth bloomed beneath her palms. Not heat, but warmth, gentle and spreading, like sunlight breaking through clouds after a storm. Sarah's eyes flew open. The bark beneath her hands was no longer gray and dead. It was darkening, turning rich brown, the cracks sealing themselves. The warmth traveled up through the trunk, into the branches, and suddenly the entire tree burst into bloom. White flowers, thousands of them, millions of them, exploded from every branch. They glowed in the moonlight, luminous and impossibly beautiful. The clearing filled with their light, brighter than day, and the scent of them was overwhelming. Honey and moonlight and something wild that Sarah had no name for. She stumbled backward, her hands leaving the bark, her mind unable to process what she was seeing. This wasn't possible. The tree had been dead for 300 years. Dead things didn't come back to life, but the flowers kept blooming, kept glowing, and now the light was spreading outward from the tree in waves. It washed over Sarah, through her, and for a moment she felt something shift deep inside. Something that had been sleeping her entire life stirred and opened one eye. Then the world tilted sideways, and darkness rushed in. 500 miles to the north, in a castle of black stone that overlooked the northern territories, Alpha King Magnus woke with a gasp that tore from his throat like a scream. Pain lanced through his chest, sharp and sudden, as if someone had driven a blade between his ribs. His wolf surged forward, taking control before Magnus could stop it. And suddenly he wasn't in his chambers anymore. He was seeing through different eyes. Standing in a clearing bathed in silver-white light, a tree that glowed like a star, and at its base, a woman with dark hair falling in waves around her face, her hands still raised toward the bark. Then she was falling, crumpling to the ground, and Magnus felt the distance between them like a physical wound. "Mine," his wolf snarled. "Ours. Find her. Now." Magnus came back to himself with a jolt, his human consciousness slamming back into control. He was on his feet before he fully realized he'd moved, his heart hammering against his ribs. The mate bond. After 32 years of searching, of hoping, of nearly giving up, the bond had finally snapped into place, and his mate was 500 miles away, unconscious at the base of a tree that shouldn't exist. He didn't remember crossing to his door or shouting for Gregor. He only knew that within minutes, his beta was standing in his chambers, sleep-rumpled and alert. "Prepare horses," Magnus ordered, his voice rough. "We ride immediately. Full supplies for a week of hard travel." "My king, what?" "I found her," Magnus interrupted. "My mate. She's 500 miles south, near the Whispering Woods by the old temple." Gregor's eyes widened. Then a grin split his face. "Finally. I'll have the horses ready in 20 minutes. When dawn broke over the Whispering Woods, Priestess Bet found Sarah lying at the base of the ancestral tree, unconscious, but breathing, and all around them, covering every branch of a tree that had been dead for 300 years, white flowers bloomed in the morning light. Chapter 2. The king rides south. The horses' hooves thundered against the frozen ground, their breath creating clouds in the pre-dawn air. Magnus leaned low over his stallion's neck, pushing the animal harder than he should have, but the urgency burning in his chest wouldn't let him slow down. Behind him, Gregor and 20 of his elite guard kept pace, their mounts equally lathered with exertion. They had been riding for 6 hours straight, stopping only to switch to fresh horses from the relay stations Magnus maintained throughout his territory. Normally he would have allowed rest periods, would have cared about the strain on both men and animals. But the mate bond pulled at him with increasing intensity, a rope around his ribs that grew tighter with every mile that remained between them. "My king," Gregor called, bringing his mount alongside Magnus's. "We need to water the horses. Another hour at this pace and we'll lose them." Magnus wanted to refuse. Every instinct in him screamed to keep going, to close the distance between himself and the woman who had been unconscious when his vision ended. But Gregor was right. Dead horses would get them nowhere. 10 minutes, Magnus growled. No more. They pulled into a clearing where a stream cut through the forest. The horses drank greedily while the warriors checked their gear and refilled water skins. Magnus paced the edge of the stream, unable to stand still, his wolf snarling just beneath his skin. "Tell me about her," Gregor said quietly, approaching with 2 pieces of dried meat. He offered one to Magnus, who took it automatically but didn't eat. "I don't know anything about her," Magnus admitted, frustration bleeding into his voice. "I saw her for maybe 30 seconds. Dark hair, green eyes, I think. She was touching a tree that had been dead for 3 centuries, and it bloomed." Gregor went very still. "The ancestral tree? That tree? You know it? Everyone knows the stories," Gregor said carefully. "The tree that died when the last Luna was executed. They say it screamed when the flames touched her and then simply stopped living. That tree? Magnus nodded, finally taking a bite of the dried meat. It tasted like ash in his mouth, but he forced himself to chew and swallow. He would need his strength. Then the prophecy is real. Gregor breathed. When the tree blooms white beneath the full moon, the true Luna shall return. I thought it was just a story. So did I, Magnus said, until last night. They remounted after exactly 10 minutes, and Magnus set a slightly more sustainable pace. But his mind was racing, calculating distances and travel times. 500 miles. If they pushed hard, stopping only when absolutely necessary, they could make it in 5 days. Maybe 4 if they were lucky. Even for an alpha pack, that kind of pace meant riding to the edge of exhaustion, then running in wolf form whenever the terrain allowed, devouring distance in brutal stretches of nearly 100 miles a day. He just hoped that was fast enough. "Tell me about the prophecy," one of the younger guards called from behind. "What does it mean?" Magnus glanced at Gregor, who nodded. The men deserved to understand what they were riding toward. What might be waiting for them? 300 years ago, Magnus began, his voice carrying over the sound of hoofbeats. The kingdom had a Luna. Not just any Luna, but one chosen by the goddess herself. She could communicate with all shifters across vast distances, could heal wounds that should have been fatal, could unite packs that had been enemies for generations. Under her guidance and my ancestors' rule, the kingdom prospered like never before. He paused, guiding his horse around a fallen log. But the Council of Ancients grew jealous of her power. They feared that the Luna held more influence over the packs than they did. So they spread rumors, called her a heretic, said she was defying the goddess by claiming powers that only the divine should possess. They turned the people against her, Gregor added, his tone dark. Made them afraid of the very person who had brought them peace and prosperity. My ancestor, the Alpha King at that time, tried to protect her. Magnus continued. But the council had spent years building their case, planting evidence, corrupting witnesses. When they finally demanded her execution, he was faced with an impossible choice: defend his Luna and plunge the kingdom into civil war, or let them take her and preserve what unity remained. He chose wrong, one of the older warriors said quietly. He chose what he thought would save the most lives. Magnus corrected, though the words tasted bitter. The Luna went to her execution willingly. She could have fought, could have called every shifter in the kingdom to her defense. But she knew that would have meant slaughter on a scale the kingdom had never seen, so she let them chain her to a stake at the base of the ancestral tree, and she burned. The guards were silent now, listening intently. They say she sang as the flames took her, Magnus said, sang a blessing over the kingdom, over the Alpha King who couldn't save her, over the children who would come after. And when she died, the tree died with her. 300 years it stood there, dead but never rotting, a monument to what was lost. Until last night, Gregor finished. When it bloomed for your mate. Magnus nodded. The implications were staggering. If the prophecy was true, if his mate was truly a Luna reborn, then she carried the same powers that had made the council kill the last one. Powers they would absolutely try to destroy again. The council has been pressuring me to marry, Magnus said, changing the subject slightly. Lord Percival's daughter, Constance. It would be a political alliance, combining territories, strengthening borders. I've been refusing for 2 years. Because you were waiting for your mate, Gregor said. Because I swore I would never make the same mistake my ancestor did, Magnus corrected. He chose politics over his mate, and it destroyed them both. He lived another 40 years after her death, never took another partner, and died alone and miserable. I swore on his grave that when I found my mate, nothing would come before her. Not politics, not the council. Nothing. They won't accept her easily, Gregor warned. Especially if she shows signs of being Luna, then they'll learn to accept what they cannot change, Magnus said flatly. Or they'll find themselves without a voice in my kingdom. The sun climbed higher as they rode, and Magnus felt the bond in his chest pulse with each heartbeat. She was alive. He could sense that much. But something felt muted, dulled, as if she was sleeping deeply, or suppressed somehow. What had happened to her after she'd collapsed? Meanwhile, 500 miles south, Sarah woke in her loft above the stables, with her head pounding and her entire body aching. For a moment, she couldn't remember why. Then the memories flooded back. The tree, the flowers, the impossible bloom of light that had filled the clearing. She sat up too quickly, and immediately regretted it as the world spun. Her hands flew to her head, trying to steady herself, and that's when she noticed they were shaking. Not from weakness, but from something else. Energy. Power. Something that thrummed just beneath her skin like a second heartbeat. "Easy," Bet's voice came from the ladder. "You've been unconscious for 2 days. Don't move too fast." 2 days? Sarah's eyes widened. She'd lost 2 entire days. Betty climbed into the loft carrying a tray with bread, cheese, and water. Her weathered face was creased with worry. "What happened?" Sarah croaked, her throat dry as sand. "I found you at the base of the ancestral tree," Bet said, setting the tray beside Sarah. The tree that's been dead for 3 centuries was covered in white flowers. They're still blooming. The whole forest glows at night. Sarah's hands trembled harder. "I touched it. I just wanted the pain to stop. I didn't mean to—" "Hush," Betty interrupted, pressing the water cup into Sarah's hands. "Drink first, then we'll talk." Sarah obeyed, gulping the cool water gratefully. When the cup was empty, Bet refilled it from a pitcher. "News of the flowering has spread," Bet said quietly, glancing toward the stable entrance as if expecting someone to appear. "Riders have come from 3 villages already. Everyone wants to see the miracle. Julienne is furious. She's been interrogating everyone, trying to find out who touched the tree." "She doesn't know it was me?" Sarah asked. "I didn't tell her. I carried you back before dawn, before anyone else saw. But Sarah, you're changing. I can see it. Your eyes are brighter. You're stronger. Yesterday, when you were unconscious, you gripped my wrist so hard you left bruises, and you didn't even wake." Sarah looked down at her hands, flexing her fingers. Bet was right. She could feel it. Something fundamental had shifted inside her. Her senses were sharper. She could hear conversations from the temple clearly, even though they were 50 yards away. Could smell the horses below her with such clarity she knew which stall each one stood in without looking. And the dreams. She'd had dreams while unconscious. Dreams of a man with storm-gray eyes and dark hair. Dreams where she wasn't alone. Where someone was coming for her. Where rough hands held her gently, and a deep voice promised she was safe. "Who is he?" Sarah whispered. "Who?" Bet asked. "The man with gray eyes. I keep seeing him, feeling him, like he's real somehow." Betty's expression shifted to something between wonder and fear. "The mate bond. It's manifesting already." "What?" Before Bet could answer, footsteps approached the stable. Heavy boots and the clink of armor. Bet's face went pale. "Hide," she hissed. "Under the blankets. Now." Sarah burrowed beneath the old blankets just as voices echoed below. "Check everywhere," a rough voice commanded. "Lord Percival wants the witch found before the Alpha King arrives." Sarah's breath caught. Mercenaries. And they were looking for her. 300 miles north. Magnus felt his mate's fear spike through the bond like a blade. His wolf snarled, trying to take control, trying to force them faster. "She's in danger," he told Gregor. "We need to move faster." "We're already killing the horses," Gregor protested. "Then we'll run as wolves," Magnus said. "Leave the supplies. We go now." And with that, the Alpha King and his elite guard shifted. 21 massive wolves racing south toward a woman none of them had met, but who their king would die to protect. Chapter 3. Fire and Transformation. The mercenaries arrived on the 3rd day after the flowering, riding hard through the temple gates with weapons drawn and faces grim. There were 8 of them, battle-scarred men who wore mismatched armor and carried themselves with the casual cruelty of those who killed for coin. Their leader was a thick-necked brute named Garrick, who dismounted and strode directly toward the temple entrance without bothering to knock. "Where is the high priestess?" he demanded of the first priestess he encountered, grabbing her arm hard enough to leave bruises. "I have business with her. Now." Within minutes, Julienne appeared in the courtyard, her face composed, but her hands clasped tightly at her waist. Sarah watched from the stable loft, her newly heightened senses picking up every word despite the distance. "Lord Percival sends his greetings," Garrick said, though his tone carried no warmth. "He's heard about the flowering, about the miracle. He wants to know who touched the tree." "I don't see how that concerns Lord Percival," Julienne replied, her voice cold. "This is a matter for the temple and the goddess." Garrick smiled, showing teeth stained brown from chewing tobacco. "Lord Percival believes witchcraft is involved. When a tree that's been dead for 3 centuries suddenly blooms, that's not a miracle. That's dark magic, and his lordship wants the witch found before the Alpha King arrives and makes things complicated." Sarah's breath caught. The Alpha King was coming? The man from her dreams? "Search the grounds," Garrick ordered his men. "Question everyone. Someone knows something." The mercenaries spread out, and Sarah watched in growing horror as they began dragging priestesses from their duties, shouting questions, threatening violence. One grabbed Priestess Agnes by her hair and shook her until she wept. Another kicked over the prayer altar in the sanctuary, scattering sacred objects across the floor. Bet appeared at the base of the stable ladder, her face pale and urgent. "Come," she whispered. "We need to get you to the cellars. Now." Sarah climbed down quickly, her hands shaking. Bet led her through the back passages of the temple, moving quickly but quietly. The cellars were beneath the main building, cool stone chambers where the priestesses stored preserves and dried goods for winter. There was a storage room at the very back, hidden behind shelves of grain sacks. "Stay here," Bet urged, moving sacks to create a space where Sarah could hide. "Don't make a sound. I'll come back when they're gone." "Bet, I'm sorry," Sarah whispered. "I didn't mean to cause this. I didn't know." "Hush. None of this is your fault." Betty squeezed her hand once, hard, then hurried back toward the stairs. Sarah crouched in the darkness behind the grain sacks, trying to control her breathing. She could hear everything happening above. The mercenaries moving through rooms, the frightened voices of priestesses, the crash of furniture being overturned. Then she heard Julienne's voice, sharp and clear. "Stop this immediately. You're desecrating holy ground." "Then tell us who touched the tree," Garrick replied. "Give us the witch, and we'll leave your temple in peace." There was a pause. A long, terrible pause. "There is a girl," Julienne said finally. "A foundling we took in 21 years ago. She was left at the base of the ancestral tree as an infant. We always knew she carried darkness." No, Bet wouldn't have told. Which meant Julienne had figured it out on her own, or had suspected all along. "Where is she?" Garrick demanded. "I don't know. She sleeps in the stables usually, but find her." Sarah heard boots thundering through the temple, heard them searching the stables, the kitchens, the gardens. It was only a matter of time before they thought to check the cellars. She tried to think. Could she run? But where? The forest was vast, but she had no survival skills, no knowledge of how to live wild, and something inside her, that new awareness that had awakened when she touched the tree, was screaming that running was the wrong choice, that she needed to stay, that he was coming. Who? The man with gray eyes. The Alpha King. Footsteps descended the cellar stairs. Heavy boots on stone. Sarah pressed herself deeper into the shadows, barely breathing. "Check every room," Garrick ordered. "The witch is down here somewhere. I can smell fear." They methodically searched each chamber, getting closer, closer. Then hands grabbed her from behind, yanking her out from the grain sacks. She tried to fight, but the mercenary was stronger, experienced in handling struggling captives. He dragged her up the stairs and out into the courtyard where Garrick waited. "This her?" he asked Julienne. The high priestess looked at Sarah with something between disgust and fear. "Yes, that's the cursed one." Bet stood frozen near the sanctuary entrance, her face stricken. "No," she breathed. "Julienne, you can't." "She brought darkness to our temple," Julienne interrupted, her voice shaking slightly. "The goddess has shown us the truth. A child left at the feet of death, raised in the shadow of heresy. We should have cast her out years ago." "You're condemning an innocent girl," Bet said, her voice breaking. "I'm protecting our order," Julienne replied. "Lord Percival was right. This is witchcraft, not miracle. Garrick smiled his horrible smile. We'll take her to the village square. Let the people see what happens to those who traffic with dark powers. Maybe it'll remind them to stay loyal to proper authority. They bound Sarah's wrists behind her back and threw her into a cart. The ride to the village took less than an hour, but it felt eternal. Sarah's mind raced, trying to understand what was happening. How had her life gone from invisible servitude to public execution in the span of 3 days? 3 days since the dead tree had exploded into impossible bloom. 3 days for awe to curdle into fear, and for fear to be parceled out as entertainment. The village square was packed with people by the time they arrived. Word had spread quickly. The witch who made the dead tree bloom was being brought to justice. Villagers lined the square, their faces a mix of fear and morbid curiosity. In the center of the square stood a wooden stake driven deep into the ground. Around its base, someone had piled kindling and larger logs, an execution pyre. Sarah's legs gave out when she saw it. The mercenaries dragged her forward, tied her to the stake with rough rope that bit into her skin. She could smell the oil they'd poured on the wood, could see the torch Garrick held, flames dancing in the afternoon sun. By the authority of Lord Percival, acting on behalf of the kingdom's safety, this woman is condemned for witchcraft, Garrick announced. She corrupted the ancestral tree with dark magic and threatens the natural order. Let her burn as a warning to others who might follow her path. I didn't do anything wrong, Sarah gasped, finding her voice at last. I just touched the tree. I was praying. I didn't know. Witches always claim innocence, Garrick interrupted. He lowered the torch toward the kindling. Bet pushed through the crowd, her robes tangled around her legs. Stop this! She's innocent. The flowering was a blessing from the goddess, not witchcraft. Restrain her, Garrick ordered, and 2 villagers grabbed Bet, holding her back despite her struggles. The torch touched the oil-soaked wood. Flames leaped upward with terrifying speed, consuming the kindling, reaching for the larger logs. Heat rolled over Sarah in waves. Smoke filled her lungs. She could feel the fire climbing higher, getting closer to her feet. Terror unlike anything she'd ever known crashed through her. This was death. This was the end. She was going to burn like the Luna had burned 300 years ago. And no one would save her. Something inside her screamed in rage and denial. A voice that wasn't quite her own, that felt ancient and powerful and absolutely furious. No, we do not burn. We are not prey. We are wolf. Power exploded through Sarah's body. Her bones cracked and reformed. Her muscles tore and rebuilt themselves stronger. Her senses sharpened until she could hear every heartbeat in the square, smell every drop of fear sweat, see every minute detail of the scene before her. Her eyes blazed golden, bright as the flames below. Fangs descended from her gums, sharp and deadly. Her fingers elongated into claws that shredded the ropes binding her, as if they were made of spider silk. The transformation was incomplete, arrested halfway between human and wolf, but it was more than sufficient. Sarah tore free from the stake with a strength that shouldn't have been possible. She leaped clear of the flames, landing in a crouch before the stunned crowd. A sound emerged from her throat that was neither human scream nor wolf howl, but something between, something primal and terrifying. The crowd panicked. People scattered in every direction, screaming, trampling each other in their desperation to flee. Even the mercenaries backed away, their weapons suddenly forgotten. Sarah didn't wait to see what they would do next. Instinct drove her toward the forest, toward darkness and cover and safety. She ran on legs that worked differently now, muscles that moved with inhuman speed and power. Behind her, she heard Garrick shouting orders, but his voice faded quickly. The forest swallowed her. She crashed through underbrush, ducked beneath low branches, splashed across a stream without slowing. She ran until her lungs burned and her newly transformed body began to fail, until the adrenaline wore off and the burns from the fire made themselves known with searing agony. She collapsed in a cave, barely conscious, her body shifting back toward human form in painful spasms. The burns covered her feet and ankles where the flames had touched. Her wrists bled from the ropes, and beneath it all, a deeper pain throbbed, the agony of bones and muscles that had changed shape violently for the first time. Sarah curled into a ball on the cold cave floor and let darkness take her. Magnus smelled the smoke before they reached the village. The acrid scent of burning wood and something else. Something that made his wolf snarl with fury, fear, pain. His mate's terror was a physical presence in the air. "Faster!" he commanded, though they were already running at their top speed. His paws ate up the ground, claws digging into earth and stone. They burst from the forest into chaos. The village square was in disarray, people running in every direction, a pyre burning in the center with ropes dangling from a stake. The remains of an execution, of his mate's execution. Magnus shifted back to human form, his eyes scanning the scene with predatory focus. "What happened here?" he roared at the nearest villager, a man frozen in terror. "Witch," the man stammered. She turned into a monster, golden eyes and claws. She ran into the forest. Relief and rage warred in Magnus's chest. She was alive, but they had tried to burn her. "Gregor, secure the village," Magnus ordered. "Find out who ordered this. I'm going after her." He didn't wait for a response. The mate bond pulled him east, into the deeper forest. He shifted back to wolf form and followed the trail of broken branches and disturbed earth, followed the scent of his mate's blood. He found her in a cave 1/2 mile from the village, unconscious and barely human. Her transformation had partially reversed, leaving her caught between forms. Her hands still bore traces of claws. Her features were subtly wrong, caught between woman and wolf. Burns covered her lower legs, and blood seeped from wounds at her wrists. Magnus shifted back to human and approached slowly, carefully. When his fingers touched her shoulder, the mate bond that had been pulling at him for days finally snapped completely into place. The sensation was overwhelming. Colors brightened, sounds sharpened, and through the bond, he could feel her pain, her fear, her exhaustion. Feel the confused wolf inside her that didn't understand what was happening. At his touch, her body relaxed. The partial shift reversed completely, leaving her fully human. Her breathing, which had been ragged and pained, evened out. Her wolf recognized its mate and submitted to his presence, trusting him to keep them safe. Gregor arrived moments later, shifted back to human form with Magnus's cloak in his hands. He stopped at the cave entrance, his eyes widening at the sight before him. "Is she?" Gregor began. "She's my mate," Magnus confirmed, wrapping the cloak around her naked, injured form. "And she's Omega, a true Omega." Gregor sucked in a breath. "I can feel it. Her aura is different, stronger than any Omega I've ever encountered. Get the healers," Magnus ordered. "Set up camp somewhere secure, and find out who tried to burn my mate alive. I want names." As Gregor departed, Magnus lifted Sarah carefully into his arms. She was lighter than she should be, malnourished and fragile despite the power he could sense sleeping inside her. "I've got you," he murmured against her hair. "You're safe now. I promise you're safe." In the distance, hidden among the trees, Priestess Bet watched the Alpha King carry Sarah away. She pressed a hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. She had failed to protect the girl, had stood by while Julien condemned her, but perhaps it wasn't too late. Perhaps she could still help. Betta began walking, following the direction the royal wolves had gone. She didn't know what she would do when she found them, but she couldn't abandon Sarah now. Not after everything. Chapter 4. Bonds and Revelations. Sarah woke to warmth. Real warmth, not the drafty cold of the stable loft, or the damp chill of the cave floor. She was lying on something soft, wrapped in blankets that smelled of pine and leather, and something indefinably masculine that made her wolf stir with contentment. Her eyes opened slowly, taking in her surroundings. She was in a tent, luxurious by any standard she knew. Rich fabrics draped the interior, and a brazier in the corner radiated heat. Her burns were gone. Her wrists showed no sign of the rope wounds. Even the aches from her violent first transformation had faded to nothing. "You're awake." The voice was deep, familiar from her dreams. Sarah's head turned, and she found herself looking at the man with storm-gray eyes. He sat in a chair beside her sleeping pallet, his elbows resting on his knees, watching her with an intensity that should have been frightening, but somehow wasn't. He was massive, easily the largest man she'd ever seen, with shoulders that seemed to fill the tent. Dark hair fell past his collar, and a neatly trimmed beard framed a face that was all sharp angles and hard planes. But his eyes, those gray eyes that had haunted her dreams, held something gentler than his appearance suggested. "Who are you?" Sarah whispered, though some part of her already knew. "Magnus," he said. "Alpha King of the Northern Territories, and your mate." The word sent a shock through her system. Mate. She'd heard the term in passing. Whispered conversations between priestesses about wolves and their destined pairs, but she'd never imagined it could apply to her. "I don't understand," she managed. "I'm not anyone. I'm just a servant. A cursed foundling who—" "You're a shifter," Magnus interrupted gently. "An Omega. A very rare and powerful one. And you're mine as surely as I'm yours." Sarah tried to sit up, and Magnus immediately moved to help her, his large hands surprisingly gentle as they steadied her. The moment he touched her, something inside her settled. The anxious flutter that had been constant since she woke calmed. Her wolf, that new awareness she barely understood, practically purred with satisfaction. "I've been asleep for 3 days," Sarah said, the knowledge coming from somewhere instinctive. "You've been here the whole time." "I wasn't leaving you," Magnus said simply. "Not after what you went through." Memory flooded back. The mercenaries, the pyre, the transformation that had torn through her body. Sarah's hands flew to her legs, expecting to find burns, but the skin was smooth and unmarked. "My healers are the best in the kingdom," Magnus explained. "They treated you while you slept. Your body healed the rest naturally. Shifters heal faster than humans." "Shifters," Sarah repeated, testing the word. "I didn't know. I never knew what I was. I thought I was just cursed." Something dark flashed across Magnus's face. "Who told you that?" "Everyone. The priestesses. The villagers. They said I was left at the dead tree because I carried darkness. That I was broken somehow." The words came easier than they should have, but something about Magnus's presence made her want to talk, want to share burdens she'd carried alone for 21 years. "You're not broken," Magnus said, his voice carrying an edge of steel. "You're extraordinary. Do you know what you did? You brought a tree back to life that had been dead for 300 years. You manifested shifter abilities without any training, under the worst possible circumstances. You survived an execution and escaped. None of that speaks to weakness, Sarah." The sound of her name and his voice sent warmth through her chest. "How do you know my name?" "The priestess told me. Bet. She's been following us since we left the village, waiting to make sure you're safe." Sarah's eyes widened. "Bet's here? She came after me? She's camped about a mile back with 2 of my guards keeping watch over her. She wanted to see you, but I needed you to wake first, to understand what's happening before we add more complications. Then explain," Sarah said, drawing the blankets closer around herself. "Because I don't understand any of this. I don't understand what I am, or why you're here, or what any of this means." Magnus settled back in his chair, his gray eyes never leaving her face. 300 years ago, there were Lunas, special Omegas, chosen by the goddess to help guide and unite the shifter packs. They had abilities beyond normal Omegas. They could communicate across vast distances, heal terrible wounds, sense danger before it struck. The last Luna was my ancestor, and she was executed by the council of ancients who feared her power. The tree died when she did," Sarah whispered, remembering the stories. "Yes, and it stayed dead until you touched it. Until you, in your desperation and pain, called out to the goddess, and she answered. The prophecy says when the tree blooms white beneath the full moon, the true Luna shall return. You're that Luna, Sarah. You're the one we've been waiting 3 centuries for." The enormity of it crashed over her. "No, that's not possible. I'm nobody. I can't even read. I've spent my entire life scrubbing floors and being told I'm worthless. I can't be some prophesied Luna. The goddess doesn't make mistakes," Magnus said firmly. "And neither does the mate bond." "What is the mate bond exactly?" Sarah asked. "I keep feeling things, emotions that aren't mine. And when you touch me, everything feels right in a way nothing ever has before. The mate bond is a connection between destined pairs, Magnus explained. It's chosen by the goddess, and it's absolute. When you're near your mate, you feel safe, complete. When you're apart, there's an ache, a pull toward them. You can sense their emotions, especially strong ones, and over time, as the bond strengthens, the connection deepens. Is that why I kept dreaming of you, even before we met? Yes, the bond was forming even across 500 miles. I felt you too. The moment you touched that tree and it bloomed, I woke feeling like someone had driven a blade into my chest. I saw through my wolf's eyes directly to you, and I knew exactly where you were and that you needed me. Sarah absorbed this, trying to reconcile the fairy tale with her reality. You said something about the council, about them having power over your choice of mate. Magnus's jaw tightened. The Council of Ancients advises the Alpha King on matters of state. By ancient law, they have the right to veto a royal mate if they can prove the union would harm the kingdom. They used that power 300 years ago to execute the last Luna, claiming she was dangerous, and I won't let them do the same to you. But if they have that power, they'll try. Magnus interrupted. Lord Percival especially. He's been pushing me to marry his daughter Constance for 2 years. A political alliance that would give him more influence over the throne. Finding out I have a mate, especially one who manifests Luna abilities, will make him desperate. Desperate men do dangerous things. Sarah's mind raced. The mercenaries. The ones who tried to burn me. They said they were working for Lord Percival. I know. Gregor is interrogating them now. We'll have proof of his conspiracy before we reach the capital. Magnus leaned forward, his elbows on his knees again. Sarah, I need you to understand something. This journey back to the capital will take about 5 days. During that time, I want to teach you about what you are, about your abilities, about the world you're entering. But I also need you to decide if you want this. If you want me. I thought the mate bond was absolute, Sarah said, confused. It is. I'll never want another woman. You're mine in every way that matters. But you have to choose to accept that. I won't force you into anything. You've spent 21 years having choices made for you, being told you're worthless and cursed. I won't add to that by demanding you accept a bond you didn't ask for. The honesty in his words struck something deep inside her. What if I said no? What if I wanted to leave? Pain flashed across Magnus's face, quickly hidden. Then I would let you go. I would give you money, protection, a place to live far from the politics of court. I would make sure you were safe and cared for, and I would spend the rest of my life alone, because there's no one else for me now. But you would be free. Sarah stared at him. This powerful Alpha King who could command thousands, who could take whatever he wanted by force, and he was offering her freedom, offering her choice. I don't want to leave, she heard herself say. I'm terrified of all of this. I don't understand it. But when you're near me, I feel less afraid. When you touch me, I feel like I can breathe properly for the first time in my life. I don't know if that's the mate bond or something else, but I don't want it to stop. Magnus's expression transformed, the hardness melting into something that looked almost like relief. Then we'll take this slowly, one day at a time. And I swear to you, Sarah, I will never let anyone hurt you again. Over the following days, as they traveled toward the capital, Sarah's education began in earnest. Gregor proved to be a patient teacher, explaining the basics of shifter society while Magnus rode alongside, occasionally adding details or corrections. There are 3 primary designations, Gregor explained on the second day as they rode through forested hills. Alphas, who are natural leaders, strong, dominant, protective. Betas, who are the backbone of any pack. Warriors, advisors, craftsmen. And Omegas, who are rarest of all. Omegas have abilities that alphas and betas don't. They can heal. They can sense emotions. They can calm aggression in ways that prevent conflicts from turning bloody. But I didn't know any of this, Sarah protested. I never shifted until the pyre. I never felt any abilities. Because you were suppressed, Magnus said from beside her. His horse walked close enough that their legs occasionally brushed, and each contact sent warmth through Sarah's body. Malnutrition, abuse, constant stress. All of it can prevent a shifter from manifesting, especially in Omega. Your body was trying to survive, and shifting takes enormous energy. It wasn't until you were faced with death that your wolf had no choice but to emerge. Sarah thought about this. At the temple, I always felt different, like something inside me was sleeping. I thought it was just the curse. It was your wolf, Gregor said, waiting for the right moment. That night, as they made camp in a clearing, Sarah noticed Magnus watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. She'd grown accustomed to his presence over the past 2 days, but there were moments when she would catch him staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite name. Hunger, maybe, or longing. "You're staring," she said quietly as she sat near the fire, wrapped in one of his cloaks. Magnus didn't look away. "I'm memorizing you. The way you move. The way firelight catches in your hair. The fact that you're real and alive and here. Why do you sound surprised that I'm alive? Because when I saw that pyre, when I smelled the smoke and knew they'd tried to burn you, something inside me broke," Magnus admitted. "I thought I'd lost you before I ever really found you." Sarah's breath caught at the raw honesty in his voice. "I was so scared. I thought I was going to die the way the Luna did. Burning and alone." "You're not alone anymore," Magnus said fiercely. "And you never will be again." On the 3rd day, Magnus showed her his scars. They were setting up camp, and Sarah had been helping arrange supplies when she'd seen the crisscross of white lines across his back through his open shirt. "What happened?" she asked before she could stop herself. Magnus stilled, then slowly turned to face her. "My mother happened. Or rather, what the council did to her." He sat down on a fallen log and gestured for Sarah to join him. When she was settled beside him, he continued, "My mother was Luna, not as powerful as you'll be, but Luna nonetheless. She could sense danger, could calm conflicts, could heal minor wounds. The council feared her influence over my father. So when I was 12 years old, they poisoned her, made it look like a wasting sickness. I watched her die over 6 months, getting weaker every day, and I couldn't do anything to stop it." "Magnus," Sarah breathed, her hand finding his without conscious thought. "I knew it was poison," he continued, his voice rough with old pain. "I could smell it on her, in her food, in her water, but I was a child. No one believed me, and by the time my father finally listened, it was too late. She died in his arms, and he never forgave himself for not protecting her." "The scars?" Sarah prompted gently. "After she died, I became obsessed with being stronger. I trained constantly, pushed myself beyond any reasonable limit. These scars are from those years. From fighting opponents who were too skilled for me. From refusing to give up even when I should have. I swore on her grave that when I became Alpha King, I would never make the same mistake my father did. I would never choose politics over my mate. I would never let the council dictate who I loved or how I protected what was mine." Sarah looked at this powerful man beside her and suddenly understood the weight he carried. "You're afraid you'll fail me the way your father failed your mother. Every single day," Magnus admitted. "Because the same people who killed her still sit on the council, still hold power, and they'll see you as the same threat they saw in her. Then we'll face them together," Sarah said, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. "I don't know how to be Luna. I don't know how to navigate politics or court intrigue, but I know how to survive. And I won't let them take what's mine." The possessiveness in her words seemed to strike something in Magnus. His gray eyes blazed, and suddenly the space between them felt charged with electricity. "Say that again," he commanded, his voice dropping lower. "I won't let them take what's mine," Sarah repeated, meeting his gaze steadily. Magnus leaned closer, his hand coming up to cup her face. "You're accepting the bond. Truly accepting it." "I'm terrified," Sarah admitted. "But yes, you're mine, Magnus, and I'm yours. Whatever that means, whatever comes next, I choose this. I choose you." The kiss that followed was inevitable. Magnus's lips met hers with a gentleness that contradicted his size and power. It was a claiming, yes, but also a promise. a vow that she was precious, protected, valued in ways she'd never been before. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Magnus rested his forehead against hers. I want you. The bond wants to be consummated, but not yet. Not until you're safe in my territory, behind walls that can't be breached, with guards who would die before letting anyone harm you. When I make you fully mine, it will be because you choose it freely, not because we're on the run from enemies. Sarah nodded, understanding even as her body protested the delay. 1 more day until we reach the capital. 2, Magnus corrected, and then the real battle begins. Behind them, hidden in the trees, Priestess Bet watched the exchange with tears in her eyes. The girl she'd tried so hard to protect had found someone who would move mountains to keep her safe. Perhaps, after all the pain and fear, Sarah was finally where she was meant to be. Chapter 5. Court of Thorns. The royal castle rose from the mountainside like a great beast of black stone, all sharp towers and narrow windows that reflected the gray sky. Sarah had never seen anything so massive, so imposing. The temple had been large, but this was a fortress that had stood for 1,000 years and would likely stand 1,000 more. It's not as cold as it looks, Magnus said quietly, sensing her apprehension through the bond. My mother filled it with warmth when she was alive. I've tried to keep that spirit, but it's hard when half the council wants to turn it back into a monument to intimidation. They rode through gates that required 6 men to open, past guards who knelt as Magnus passed, into a courtyard filled with nobles and servants who had gathered to witness the Alpha King's return, and to see what he'd brought back with him. Sarah felt their eyes on her like physical weight, assessing, judging. She wore a dress that Magnus's servants had provided during their journey, simple but well made, but she still felt like a fraud, like the stable girl playing dress-up in clothes, meant for someone better. Head up, Magnus murmured as he dismounted and came around to help her down from her horse. You're my mate. That makes you their future queen. Don't apologize for existing. But the whispers had already started. Sarah's enhanced hearing picked up fragments that made her stomach clench. That's her? She looks half-starved. I heard she's a witch, that she seduced the king with dark magic. Poor Lady Constance. To be set aside for some common foundling. Magnus's hand found hers, his grip firm and grounding. Together they walked through the courtyard, up marble steps worn smooth by centuries of feet, into a great hall that took Sarah's breath away. Tapestries lined the walls depicting battles and hunts. Chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, their candles unlit in the daylight, but promising illumination come evening. And at the far end, 2 thrones sat on a raised platform. One occupied, one empty for 300 years. My king. A man stepped forward from a group of nobles clustered near the thrones. He was perhaps 50, with silver-streaked hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. His eyes swept over Sarah with barely concealed disdain. We were not informed you were bringing a guest. Lord Percival, Magnus replied, his voice carrying an edge that made several people flinch. This is Sarah, my mate, your future queen. The silence that followed was deafening. Then the hall erupted in whispers, gasps, and at least one noble woman's dramatic swoon. Lord Percival's face went through several expressions before settling on carefully neutral. Your mate, he repeated. How fortunate. Though surely such an important announcement requires council approval before... The mate bond is chosen by the goddess, Magnus interrupted, his voice carrying the unmistakable weight of Alpha Command. The council has no authority over divine will. Of course not, my king. I merely meant that protocol requires certain procedures be followed. Tests to verify the bond is genuine, to ensure this woman is truly who she claims to be. I've claimed nothing, Sarah heard herself say, her voice steadier than she felt. I didn't even know what a mate bond was until 5 days ago. Percival's eyes narrowed on her. And yet here you stand, claiming the king's attention. Forgive me if I find that convenient. Percival. Magnus's voice dropped to a growl that made every shifter in the hall tense. You will show my mate respect, or you will remove yourself from my presence. Choose quickly. Before Percival could respond, a woman stepped forward from the group of nobles. She was beautiful in a cold way. with blonde hair elaborately styled, and a dress that probably cost more than Sarah had seen in her entire life. Lady Constance, Sarah realized. The woman Magnus was supposed to have married. Perhaps, Constance said, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. We should give the king's guest time to settle in before we overwhelm her with court politics. She looks exhausted, poor thing. The condescension was wrapped in false kindness, but Sarah heard it clearly. So did Magnus, whose hand tightened on hers. My daughter is right, Percival said smoothly. We can discuss the matter of verification at tomorrow's council meeting. For now, welcome home, my king. And welcome to our court, Miss Sarah. The dismissal was clear. Sarah was not yet recognized as mate or queen. She was a guest. A temporary inconvenience to be tolerated until they found a way to remove her. Magnus led Sarah away from the hall, through corridors that seemed to stretch forever, until they reached a suite of rooms that took her breath away. Windows overlooked the valley below. Furniture that looked too fine to touch filled the space, and through a doorway, she glimpsed a bed large enough for 6 people. These are my chambers, Magnus said. You'll stay here with me. Anyone who wants to harm you will have to go through me first. They hate me, Sarah said quietly. I felt it. The nobles, the servants, even the guards. They think I'm a fraud. They fear you, Magnus corrected. There's a difference. They've spent 3 centuries without a Luna, and power has consolidated in the hands of people like Percival. Your existence threatens that power structure. A knock at the door interrupted them. Gregor entered, his expression grim. My king, there's already talk. Percival has called an emergency council session for tomorrow. He's demanding formal verification of the mate bond. Let him demand, Magnus said. The bond is real. Any shifter with senses can feel it. He's also spreading rumors, saying the woman is a witch who's enchanted you with dark magic, that she made the tree bloom through forbidden arts, that accepting her will bring the same destruction the last Luna brought. Sarah felt sick. This is my fault. If I hadn't touched the tree, you'd be dead, Magnus interrupted fiercely. And I'd be alone. Don't you dare regret surviving. The days that followed were a special kind of torture. Magnus tried to shield Sarah from the worst of court politics, but there was no hiding from the cruelty of the noble women. Lady Constance had gathered a following of ladies who made it their mission to remind Sarah of her inadequacy. They would speak just loudly enough for her to hear as she passed. Such unfortunate hair. So common. Perhaps she could afford to have it styled if she wasn't penniless. I heard she can't even read. Imagine a queen who can't read state documents. Well, what can you expect from a stable girl? Sarah tried to ignore them, but each comment was a knife that found its mark. She was everything they said she was. Uneducated, poor, common. What right did she have to stand beside Magnus? The public banquet came 3 days after their arrival. Magnus had warned her it would be a test, but she hadn't understood what that meant until Lord Percival stood and called for silence. Given the concerns raised by many council members about the legitimacy of this supposed mate bond, Percival announced, his voice carrying across the hall, I propose a simple verification, a test that any Luna would pass without difficulty. Magnus's hand found Sarah's beneath the table, squeezing in silent support. 3 centuries ago, the last Luna was accused of witchcraft, of using dark magic to manipulate the Alpha King. The test used then was simple. True servants of the goddess, blessed by her light, can touch blessed silver without harm. Witches, however, burn. A servant approached carrying a tray. On it lay a silver circlet, ornate and clearly ancient. This crown was blessed by the high priestess of the lunar temple 300 years ago. Let the girl touch it. If she's truly chosen by the goddess, she has nothing to fear. Every eye in the hall turned to Sarah. She could feel Magnus's fury through the bond, his desire to refuse, to protect her from this humiliation. But she also understood. If she refused, they would call her a coward, would say her fear proved her guilt. I'll do it, Sarah said quietly. She stood, forcing her legs to remain steady, and walked to where the servant held the tray. The silver circlet gleamed in the candlelight, beautiful and dangerous. Around her, nobles leaned forward, hungry to see her fail. Sarah reached out and touched the silver. Nothing happened. No burn. No pain. The metal was cool beneath her fingers, smooth and harmless. She lifted the circlet. Holding it up so everyone could see, she wore no gloves, no protection. Just her bare hands against blessed silver that should have burned a witch to the bone. The hall erupted in shocked murmurs. Percival's face went through several expressions before settling on forced politeness. Well, that certainly confirms something. But Sarah could see his mind working, already planning his next move. The silver test had backfired. He needed a different approach. The weeks that followed brought a different kind of attack. Subtle rumors. Whispered suggestions that perhaps Sarah had found a way to trick the silver test. That witches had grown more sophisticated in 3 centuries. That her very presence was causing unrest in the kingdom. Then Priestess Bet arrived. She came to the castle on a gray morning, travel-worn and exhausted, demanding to see Sarah. The guards might have turned her away, but Magnus had left orders that anyone from the temple should be brought to him immediately. Sarah, Bet breathed when they were finally reunited in Magnus's chambers. Thank the goddess. I've been traveling for weeks trying to find you. She pulled a small object from her robes. A medallion on a tarnished chain. This was with you when you were found. I kept it hidden all these years because I was afraid of what it meant, but you need to know the truth. Magnus took the medallion, turning it over in his hands. His face went very still. This is the Luna bloodline crest. This exact symbol hung in the council chamber until they destroyed it after the last Luna's execution. Sarah is descended from her. Betta confirmed. Direct bloodline. That's why the tree responded to her touch. That's why she manifests Luna powers. She is the prophesied return. The implications were staggering. Sarah wasn't just any Luna. She was the heir to the woman who had been executed, the direct continuation of a bloodline everyone thought had ended. Percival will try to kill her, Gregor said flatly. The moment he learns this, he'll move from political maneuvering to direct action. She's not just a threat to his power. She's a threat to everything the council built after the last Luna died. Then we keep this quiet, Magnus decided, until we have enough evidence to destroy Percival politically. Betta, you'll stay here as Sarah's companion. Gregor, double the guards on our chambers, and someone find out where Percival's men are at all times. But they were already too late. The assassins came 3 nights later, silent as shadows, slipping past guards who had been drugged with something in their evening meal. They moved through the castle with the confidence of men who had inside knowledge of patrol routes and shift changes. Sarah woke to Magnus's growl and the sound of steel leaving its sheath. She rolled from the bed instinctively, her new shifter reflexes saving her as a blade whistled through the space where her head had been. 3 men in dark clothing, faces covered, weapons gleaming in the moonlight streaming through windows. Magnus was already engaging 2 of them, his sword moving with lethal grace, but the third was focused entirely on Sarah. She backed away, her wolf rising to the surface, preparing to shift. But the assassin was faster. He lunged, blade flashing, and Magnus moved to intercept. The blade, coated in something dark and poisonous, caught Magnus across the ribs. He stumbled, his sword falling from suddenly nerveless fingers. Sarah saw his face go gray, saw him collapse to his knees. Magnus! The scream tore from her throat. The assassin came at her again, but something in Sarah snapped. Power she hadn't known she possessed erupted outward in a wave that sent the man flying across the room. The other 2 assassins froze, their weapons clattering to the floor as they clutched their heads, overwhelmed by the psychic force of her rage. But Sarah barely noticed them. She was on her knees beside Magnus, her hands already moving to his wound. The poison was spreading. She could see dark veins crawling up his chest toward his heart. No, she whispered. No, you don't get to die. You promised to keep me safe. You don't get to leave me. Her hands began to glow. Golden light, warm and bright, poured from her palms into his wound. She could feel the poison, could sense it destroying his body from within. So she did what instinct demanded. She pulled it out. The pain of absorbing aconite poison was indescribable. It felt like liquid fire in her veins, like her blood was boiling, like every nerve in her body was being shredded. But she didn't stop. She pulled the poison from Magnus's body into her own, purified it with golden light, burned it away with Luna fire she hadn't known she could create. Magnus's color returned. His breathing steadied. The dark veins faded, and Sarah collapsed beside him, unconscious before she hit the floor. Chapter 6. Crown of Light. Sarah woke to the sound of raised voices and the smell of healing herbs. Her body ached in ways she'd never experienced, a deep exhaustion that went beyond physical tiredness. It felt like she'd burned through every reserve of energy she possessed. "She's been unconscious for 4 days. Gregor's voice came from somewhere nearby. "The healers say she purified aconite poison. That should have killed her, Magnus. Even a Luna shouldn't be able to survive that." "She didn't just survive it. She saved my life." Magnus's voice was rough with emotion. "And now Percival is using the assassination attempt as ammunition against her." Sarah's eyes opened slowly. She was in Magnus's chambers again, but the room was crowded now. Healers, guards, and Betty, who sat in a chair near the bed with dark circles under her eyes. "You're awake," Betta breathed, her weathered face breaking into a relieved smile. "Thank the goddess." Magnus was at her side in an instant, his large hand engulfing hers. "How do you feel?" "Like I fought a battle and lost," Sarah managed, her voice hoarse. "The assassins? Dead or imprisoned," Magnus said grimly. "But Percival has called an emergency council session. He's demanding a formal trial. He claims the assassination attempt was staged by you to gain sympathy, and that you used dark magic to poison me so you could then heal me and prove your worth." Sarah stared at him in disbelief. "That's insane. Why would I poison you when you're the only person protecting me?" "Logic has no place in Percival's accusations," Gregor said from where he stood near the window. "He's desperate now. The silver test failed. You saved the king's life in front of witnesses. He needs something bigger to discredit you. The trial is tomorrow," Magnus continued, his gray eyes filled with frustration. "And by ancient law, I cannot simply refuse. The council has the right to question anyone they believe poses a threat to the kingdom. If I override them without proper cause, it gives them grounds to accuse me of tyranny. Then I'll face their questions," Sarah said, though fear twisted in her stomach. "It won't be simple questions," Bet warned. "I've been listening to the court gossip. Percival has gathered witnesses from villages across the kingdom. People claiming you cursed their crops, caused livestock to sicken, brought misfortune wherever you went. All lies," Magnus growled. "Lies that will sound convincing to those who want to believe them," Gregor said. "And many do. The nobles who support Percival have been spreading fear for weeks. They've convinced half the kingdom that accepting a Luna will bring the same destruction that came 300 years ago." Sarah sat up slowly, her body protesting the movement. "Then we need to give them proof they can't deny. Something so absolute that even Percival's lies can't overcome it." "What kind of proof?" Magnus asked. An idea was forming in Sarah's mind, something instinctive that her newly awakened Luna nature whispered. In the temple there were stories about the old tests, rituals that verified Luna bloodline. "Is the ancestral crown still intact?" Magnus and Gregor exchanged glances. "It's in the royal crypts," Gregor said slowly. "It's been there since the last Luna died. Stone now, they say. Turned to stone when she burned, and it's never responded to anyone since. Take me to it," Sarah said. "After the trial," Magnus insisted. "You need more time to recover." But Sarah shook her head. "The trial is when I'll need it most." The great hall was packed the following morning. Every alpha from every pack in the kingdom had been summoned, along with countless nobles, advisors, and witnesses. The crowd numbered in the hundreds, all pressed into the massive space, their voices creating a din that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. Sarah stood before them in a simple gray dress, her dark hair braided back from her face. She looked small and vulnerable, exactly what Percival wanted the council to see. Magnus sat on his throne, his face an impassive mask, but Sarah could feel his fury and fear through their bond. He'd wanted to stand beside her, but protocol demanded the Alpha King remain neutral during council proceedings. Lord Percival stood at the center of the hall, playing to the crowd with practiced ease. "We gather today to address a grave threat to our kingdom. This woman, Sarah, claims to be the Alpha King's mate, claims to be blessed by the goddess, but her presence has brought nothing but chaos and violence. He gestured to a group of villagers who stood to one side, their faces carefully arranged in expressions of fear and anger. These good people have traveled far to testify to her crimes. One by one, they told their stories. A farmer claimed Sarah had cursed his fields, causing his wheat to wither overnight. A merchant swore she'd brought plague to his village. A mother wept as she described her child's mysterious illness that began the day Sarah supposedly passed through their town. All lies. Sarah knew they were lies. She'd never been to most of these places, had never met these people, but they delivered their testimony with conviction, and the crowd murmured in growing agitation. Furthermore, Percival continued when the witnesses had finished, the assassination attempt 4 nights ago was clearly orchestrated by the woman herself. She poisoned the king with aconite, then used dark magic to extract it, making herself appear heroic while actually proving she traffics in forbidden arts. That's not what happened, Sarah said, her voice cutting through the hall. I healed him because he's my mate, and I would die before letting him be harmed. So you admit to using magic? Percival pounced. Magic that mimics Luna abilities, but is actually witchcraft learned from forbidden sources. I am Luna, Sarah said simply. Chosen by the goddess, blessed by the ancestral tree. The tree bloomed because you corrupted it with dark magic, Percival countered. Just as the last Luna corrupted it 3 centuries ago. We all know how that story ended. In flames and destruction. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, more hostile. Sarah could feel their fear, their anger, their willingness to believe she was dangerous. The evidence is overwhelming, Percival declared. This woman is a threat to our kingdom, to our king, to everything we've built. I move that she be sentenced to death, her body burned, and her ashes scattered so she cannot corrupt our lands further. Sarah's blood ran cold. This was it. The moment Percival had been building toward. And if the council voted for execution, even Magnus couldn't save her without triggering civil war. She looked up at Magnus on his throne. His knuckles were white where he gripped the armrests, his jaw clenched so hard she thought his teeth might crack. Through the bond, she felt his desperation, his helpless rage. Then Sarah remembered Bet's words from weeks ago. The goddess provides solutions, not just challenges. I demand the right of verification, Sarah said clearly, her voice carrying across the now silent hall. Percival's eyes narrowed. You already passed the silver test. That proves nothing except that you've learned to resist blessed metal. Not silver, Sarah said. The ancestral crown, the lineage test. Shocked silence fell across the hall. Even Percival looked momentarily thrown. The crown has been stone for 300 years, he said finally. No one has been able to awaken it. It's a meaningless test. Then you should have no objection to me trying, Sarah replied. Unless you're afraid of what might happen if I succeed. The challenge was clear. Percival couldn't refuse without appearing cowardly before all the assembled alphas. Sarah saw the calculation in his eyes, saw him decide that she would fail, and her failure would be the final proof he needed. Very well, Percival said with a cold smile. Let the girl try the ancient test. When she fails, we'll have our answer. The procession to the royal crypts was solemn and silent. Hundreds of witnesses followed, including every member of the council, every alpha of rank, and countless nobles who wouldn't miss this spectacle for anything. The crypts were beneath the castle, carved from living rock centuries ago. The air was cold and still, heavy with the weight of history. Torches lined the walls, their flames casting dancing shadows across stone tombs and memorial plaques. At the very center of the largest chamber, on a pedestal of white marble, sat the ancestral crown. It had been beautiful once. Sarah could see that despite its current state. The shape of it suggested delicate metalwork, intricate designs that would have caught light and thrown it back in rainbow patterns. But now it was stone, gray, dead stone covered in moss and age, as lifeless as the tree had been before she touched it. 300 years, Magnus said quietly, standing beside her at the edge of the crowd. 300 years it sat there, and no one has been able to wake it. Are you certain, Sarah? She wasn't certain of anything. But something in her chest, something that felt ancient and powerful and absolutely sure, told her this was right. This was meant to happen. I'm certain, she whispered back. She walked forward alone. The crowd parted for her, hundreds of eyes watching her every step. She could hear their breathing, their heartbeats, their whispered prayers and curses. The weight of their attention pressed down on her shoulders, but she kept walking. When she reached the pedestal, she stood for a moment, just looking at the crown. Then she closed her eyes, whispered a prayer to the goddess, and touched the stone. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then warmth bloomed beneath her fingers. The same warmth she'd felt when she touched the tree. The same recognition. The same welcome. The same sense of coming home. The stone began to change. Gray cracked and fell away like old skin shedding, revealing gold beneath. Pure gold that gleamed in the torchlight. The moss dissolved. The age faded. And suddenly the crown wasn't stone anymore, but living metal, beautiful and whole and radiating power that made every shifter in the room gasp. The crown rose, levitated from the pedestal, floating upward on currents of golden light. It hung suspended for a moment, turning slowly, and Sarah saw the intricate designs clearly now. Wolves running through forests, the moon in all its phases, flowers blooming and falling, the entire cycle of life and death and rebirth captured in gold. Then the crown descended, settling gently onto Sarah's head. The moment it touched her hair, power exploded through the chamber. Every Luna stone embedded in the walls, dark for 3 centuries, suddenly blazed to life. Golden light flooded the crypts, so bright that people shielded their eyes, and through Sarah's skin, visible to everyone watching, her blood began to glow. Golden veins traced intricate patterns across her hands, her arms, her face. The mark of Luna, undeniable and absolute. Sarah opened her eyes, and they blazed gold as the sun. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 300 years of silenced truth. I am Sarah, daughter of the Luna bloodline, chosen by the goddess, marked by the ancestral crown. I am Luna returned, and I claim my place. The crypts fell absolutely silent. Even Percival stood frozen, his face ashen. The proof was irrefutable. The crown wouldn't wake for anyone not blessed by the goddess herself. The Luna stones wouldn't light for anyone not of true bloodline. And no witch, no matter how powerful, could make their blood glow gold. One by one, the alphas dropped to their knees, then the nobles, then even the common witnesses who'd been paid to testify against her. They knelt because instinct demanded it, because their wolves recognized Luna and could do nothing else. Magnus was the last to kneel, and when he did, his voice rang out clear and absolute. My Luna, my queen, my mate, blessed by the goddess and proven before all witnesses. Only Percival remained standing, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. But even he couldn't deny what everyone had seen. His political maneuvering, his lies, his carefully constructed case. All of it had shattered against irrefutable divine proof. Sarah looked at him, the crown resting easily on her head as if it had been made for her, and spoke words she knew he would never forget. You tried to burn me once. The goddess disagreed. Try again, Lord Percival, and see what happens to those who defy her will. The threat was clear, and in that moment, with golden light still emanating from her skin and the ancient crown blazing on her head, no one in that chamber doubted she could back it up. Chapter 7. Queen of Dawn. The celebration of Sarah's verification lasted only hours before Percival's final desperate move revealed itself. Sarah was in Magnus's chambers, still wearing the ancestral crown that refused to leave her head, when Gregor burst through the door with a face like thunder. "Bet's been taken," he said without preamble. Percival's men grabbed her from the guest quarters. They left this. He handed Magnus a sealed letter. The Alpha King's face went cold as stone as he read. Then he passed it to Sarah without a word. The message was brief and brutal. Your Luna may have proven her bloodline, but bloodlines mean nothing to dead women. Priestess Bet will burn at dawn unless the girl renounces her claim and leaves the kingdom forever. Come alone to Percival's manor, or her death will be on your conscience. Sarah's hands shook as she lowered the letter. He's insane. The entire kingdom just saw the crown except me. The council recognized me as Luna. What does he think this will accomplish? He's cornered, Magnus said, his voice deadly calm. Cornered animals are the most dangerous. If he can force you to leave voluntarily, he can claim you were never truly committed to the role, that you abandoned us when tested. It would plant doubt, weaken your legitimacy. Then I'll go, Sarah said immediately. I won't let Bet die because of me. Absolutely not, Magnus growled. It's a trap. He'll kill you both. Then what do we do? Sarah demanded. She came all this way to protect me, to give me the truth about my bloodline. I can't abandon her. Gregor was already moving toward the door. I'll gather warriors. We storm Percival's manor. Free Bet by force. He'll kill her the moment he sees you coming, Sarah said, her mind racing. He needs leverage, and a dead hostage has no value. But he'll use her death as a final strike if he knows he's lost. She stood, pacing the chamber, the crown on her head feeling heavier than gold should. Something was pulling at her awareness, a whisper of possibility. During the verification, when the Luna stones had blazed to life, she'd felt something, a connection, like threads extending from her to every stone in the castle. In the kingdom, the Luna stones. She said slowly. When I touched the crown, all of them activated. I could feel them. They're connected to me somehow. Magnus's eyes sharpened. The old texts say Luna could communicate through the stones, send messages across vast distances, share visions, broadcast truth to every shifter in the kingdom simultaneously. I don't know how to do that, Sarah protested. You didn't know how to purify aconite poison either, Gregor pointed out. Your Luna abilities manifest when you need them most. Sarah closed her eyes, reaching for that connection she'd felt in the crypts. At first, there was nothing. Then, like finding a thread in darkness, she sensed it. A network of light spanning the entire kingdom, every Luna stone a node in a web that had been dormant for 3 centuries. Take me back to the crypts, she said. To the stones there. They're the strongest. They moved quickly through the castle, guards falling in around them. The crypts felt different now, warmer somehow. Welcoming. The Luna stones embedded in the walls pulsed with gentle light, responding to her presence. Sarah approached the largest stone, the one directly behind where the crown had rested. When she placed her hands on its surface, power flooded through her. Not overwhelming like the poison had been, but vast, limitless, a conduit to every shifter consciousness in the kingdom. What if I can show them? Sarah breathed. Not just tell them Percival is guilty, but show them. The stones hold memories. 300 years of watching, recording. If I can access those memories, find evidence of his crimes, can you do that without destroying yourself? Magnus asked, his hand on her shoulder, grounding her through their bond. I don't know, but Bet is going to die if I don't try. She closed her eyes and let her consciousness sink into the stone. Images flooded her mind. Centuries of history played out in flashes. Coronations and funerals. Wars and celebrations. And there, more recent, memories that made her blood run cold. Percival in a darkened room, counting gold coins with mercenaries. The girl must not reach the capital. Make it look like rogues. Percival meeting with the assassins who'd attacked Magnus. The king is the only thing protecting her. Remove him, and the council will support my claim that she must be eliminated. And older. Much older. Percival as a younger man, slipping something into a cup of wine. A beautiful woman with Magnus's eyes accepting the cup with a grateful smile. Magnus's mother. The Luna who'd been slowly poisoned over 6 months. Sarah gasped, pulling slightly back from the flood of images, but she'd seen what she needed. Evidence that couldn't be denied or explained away. Now she just needed to share it. She reached out through the network of stones, finding the threads that connected to every shifter consciousness in the kingdom. It was like learning to sing a song she'd always known, but never performed. Natural once she stopped fighting it. Everyone needs to see this, she whispered. Every shifter in the kingdom. Now. And then she broadcast. Across the kingdom, every shifter stopped what they were doing. In villages and cities, in forests and fields, in Percival's manor where Bet sat bound in a cell awaiting dawn, in the castle where nobles were still discussing the crown verification. Every shifter's mind was suddenly filled with images. Percival's crimes played out in undeniable clarity. The hiring of mercenaries to kill Sarah, the assassination attempt on Magnus, the poisoning of the previous Luna. 20 years of corruption, murder, and betrayal laid bare for all to witness. Sarah's voice, amplified through Luna power, spoke to every consciousness at once. Lord Percival has betrayed his king, his kingdom, and the goddess herself. He holds Priestess Bet hostage, threatening to murder an innocent woman to protect his crimes. But truth cannot be silenced. Justice cannot be denied, and those who stand with traitors will share their fate. The broadcast cut off, and Sarah collapsed. Magnus caught her before she hit the ground, gathering her against his chest. Did it work? She managed. The entire kingdom just saw Percival's guilt, Gregor said, his expression one of awed disbelief. Every shifter, every alpha, every member of the council. There's no denying what you showed them. Even as he spoke, the castle erupted into chaos. Nobles who'd supported Percival were fleeing, trying to distance themselves from his fall. Council members were calling for immediate action. And in Percival's manor, his own guards were turning on him. Lady Constance appeared in the crypt entrance, her face pale but determined. "I renounce my father," she announced clearly. "His crimes are his own. I had no knowledge of his conspiracy, and I will testify against him if required to prove my loyalty to the crown." It was pure self-preservation, but it was also smart. Constance was cutting ties before she could be dragged down with her father's sinking ship. "Alpha Roderick of the Eastern Territory has offered marriage," Constance continued, addressing Magnus directly. "I've accepted. I'll leave for his lands tomorrow and trouble your court no more." Magnus nodded once, dismissing her. She'd never been the enemy, just a pawn in her father's games. Now she was escaping the board entirely. "Gregor, take 50 warriors," Magnus commanded. "Go to Percival's manor. His own people will have turned on him by now. Secure Bet and bring Percival to me in chains." Gregor departed at a run. Magnus lifted Sarah, carrying her back to his chambers despite her protests that she could walk. "You just broadcast to thousands of consciousnesses simultaneously," he said. "You're allowed to be tired." By evening it was finished. Gregor returned with Bet, shaken but unharmed, and Percival in chains. The Lord's own guards had subdued him the moment the broadcast ended, seeing no profit in protecting a condemned traitor. The trial was swift. With the evidence Sarah had revealed, there was no defense. Every crime was witnessed by too many minds to deny. Percival was sentenced to exile beyond the kingdom's borders, his titles stripped, his lands confiscated, his name stricken from the rolls of nobility. As guards dragged him away, Percival turned one last time to stare at Sarah with pure hatred. "You've doomed this kingdom, just like the last Luna did. Mark my words, girl. Your powers will bring destruction. The only destruction here is what you caused," Sarah replied calmly. "And the only thing I've doomed is your conspiracy." In the aftermath, other truths came to light. News arrived from the Lunar Temple that High Priestess Julienne had been removed from her position by the High Council of the Order. They'd investigated after learning how she'd delivered Sarah to mercenaries, and had discovered years of abuse and corruption. Julienne was exiled to a remote sanctuary where she would spend her remaining years in isolated contemplation of her sins. With the threats eliminated and the kingdom finally at peace, Magnus came to Sarah one evening as the sun set over the mountains. "Walk with me," he said simply. He led her through the castle, out through gates and gardens, until they stood at the edge of the whispering woods. Then they walked together into the forest, following a path that Sarah knew by heart now. To the ancestral tree. It stood in the clearing, covered in white flowers that glowed in the twilight, beautiful and alive, a monument to second chances and divine will. "Sarah," Magnus said, taking her hands in his, "you are Luna. You are queen. The kingdom has recognized you. The goddess has claimed you, and the crown has accepted you. But I need to know that you choose this, that you choose me, not because of prophecy or duty or political necessity, but because you want this life, this bond, this future." Sarah looked up at him, this powerful alpha king who'd crossed 500 miles to save her, who'd fought councils and conspiracies to protect her, who looked at her like she was his entire world. "I was nobody," she said quietly, "a cursed foundling who thought she deserved nothing. But you've shown me I deserve everything. Love, purpose, belonging. You've given me a home, Magnus. Not just a place, but a feeling of finally being where I'm meant to be. So yes, I choose this. I choose you. I choose us." Magnus's smile was like sunrise. He pulled a ring from his pocket, simple gold with a moonstone that caught the light. "Then be my queen. Truly. Completely. Stand beside me. Rule with me. Build a future with me." "Yes," Sarah said, her voice steady and sure. "Yes to all of it." The claiming ceremony was held beneath the ancestral tree 3 days later. Every alpha in the kingdom attended, along with countless nobles and common folk who'd traveled to witness history. Sarah wore white, her dark hair flowing loose down her back, the ancestral crown resting on her head. Magnus stood beside her in formal attire, looking every inch the king he was. The ritual was ancient, spoken in words that predated the kingdom itself. When Magnus marked her, completing the mate bond that had been building since the night the tree bloomed, power exploded between them. Golden light that made the flowers on the tree glow brighter, energy that rippled outward in waves. And then the tree did something impossible. Seeds formed in seconds, glowing like tiny stars. They lifted from the branches, thousands of them, floating upward on currents of magic. Then they dispersed, carried on winds that blew in every direction, spreading across the entire kingdom. Where the seeds landed, blessing followed. Crops that had been failing revived. Sickness lifted. Old grievances between packs dissolved. The goddess's favor, made manifest through her returned Luna. That night, in chambers that belonged to both of them now, Magnus and Sarah finally consummated their bond. It was gentle and fierce, tender and consuming, everything their connection had promised it would be. When it was done, when they lay tangled together in the aftermath, Sarah felt complete in a way she'd never imagined possible. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you," Magnus replied, pulling her closer. "My Luna, my queen, my everything." And outside their windows, across the entire kingdom, white flowers bloomed on trees that had never borne such blossoms before, the goddess's blessing on a love that had saved them all. Chapter 8. Roots and Blossoms. 6 years had passed since the claiming ceremony beneath the ancestral tree, and the kingdom barely resembled the fractured, fearful place it had been. Spring had returned once more, bringing with it the annual flowering of the great tree, and today the air thrummed with celebration. 4 years had passed since the birth of her twins, the quieter miracle that had turned a fragile new crown into a family. Sarah stood in the garden courtyard, watching her 4-year-old twins race through the newly planted flower beds with the focused determination only children possessed. Marin, her son, all dark hair and gray eyes like his father, was currently attempting to climb a stone bench while declaring himself king of the garden. Lyra, her daughter with Sarah's green eyes and wild spirit, was gathering fallen blossoms into her apron, chattering to them as if they could answer. "Mama, look," Lyra called, running over with her collection of white petals. "The tree gave me presents again." Sarah knelt, accepting the flowers with appropriate reverence. "They're beautiful, little moon. What will you do with them?" "Give them to the new children," Lyra said seriously. Sister Bet always said flowers make people feel welcome. The mention of Bet brought the familiar ache to Sarah's chest, but it was gentler now, softened by time and good memories. The priestess had lived 2 peaceful years in the castle before passing in her sleep, surrounded by the children she'd helped Sarah teach. They'd buried her beneath the ancestral tree, and Sarah visited the grave every week, bringing flowers and sharing stories of the school that had grown beyond anything either of them had imagined. "That's very kind," Sarah said, stroking her daughter's hair. "Bet I would be proud of you. A warm presence appeared at her back, and Magnus's arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her against his chest. Their mate bond hummed with contentment, as it always did when they were close. "The delegation from the Eastern Territory has arrived," he murmured against her ear. "They've brought 10 more orphans. Omegas, mostly, taken from abusive situations." Sarah nodded, her heart swelling with purpose. Over the past 6 years, she'd established a network of sanctuaries across the kingdom using funds confiscated from Percival's estates and his co-conspirators. Safe houses where abused Omegas could flee, where orphans could find home, where anyone cast aside by their pack could start again. The Luna's school had begun as a simple reading circle in the castle gardens, but it now had branches in every major settlement, teaching children regardless of rank or origin. "I'll greet them myself," Sarah said. "Lyra, come. We have new friends to welcome." Her daughter's face lit up, and she grabbed Sarah's hand, practically dragging her toward the castle entrance. Marin abandoned his bench kingdom to follow, not wanting to miss anything important. The children from the Eastern Territory looked exactly as Sarah had once looked, thin, fearful, with eyes that expected cruelty from every direction. The youngest, a boy who couldn't be more than 5, clutched a tattered blanket and refused to meet anyone's gaze. Sarah knelt before him, making herself small and unthreatening. "Hello? My name is Sarah. What's yours?" The boy's eyes flicked up, then down again. "Colin, my lady. Just Sarah," she corrected gently. "And this is my daughter Lyra, who has something for you." Lyra stepped forward, solemn as a priestess, and placed a white blossom in Colin's hand. "The ancestral tree grows these. They mean you're home now. You're safe." Something in the boy's face cracked, and tears began sliding down his cheeks. Not tears of fear, but of relief. Sarah gathered him into her arms, and he clung to her as if she were the only solid thing in a tilting world. Over his head, Sarah's eyes met Magnus's. Her mate stood watching with an expression of fierce pride and love that still made her breath catch even after 6 years. Later, after the new children had been settled with the others, fed, and given clean clothes, Sarah made her way to the one place she went whenever she needed to think. The ancestral tree stood in the clearing beyond the castle walls, exactly as it had for 3 centuries, but alive now, covered in blossoms that glowed softly in the afternoon light. She pressed her palms against the bark, feeling the thrum of power that lived there. The tree had become a pilgrimage site. Omegas from across the kingdom came to touch it, to pray to the goddess, to seek the blessing that had transformed Sarah's life, and the tree answered. Always. "You look thoughtful," Magnus said, appearing beside her. He'd learned to move silently when he wanted, though Sarah always felt him through the bond before she saw him. "I was remembering," she said. 6 years ago, I touched this tree wanting to die, begging for my pain to end, and instead, it gave me everything." Magnus's arm wrapped around her shoulders. The goddess knew what she was doing. "Did she?" Sarah asked softly. "Sometimes I look at these children, at what they've survived, and I wonder why the goddess allows such suffering, why she didn't intervene sooner, because she intervenes through us," Magnus said. "Through Luna, who opens sanctuaries, who teaches reading, who shows abandoned children that they have value. The goddess doesn't wave her hand and fix everything. She plants seeds and waits for them to grow." Sarah leaned into him, drawing strength from his certainty. "The council wants to expand the sanctuary network into the southern territories. Lord Brennan is resisting. Says it undermines pack authority to question how alphas treat their omegas. Lord Brennan can come explain that position to you personally," Magnus said, a dangerous edge in his voice. "Wearing the crown, using your Luna abilities to broadcast his thoughts to the entire kingdom. I suspect his objections will become less vocal." Sarah smiled despite herself. Over the years, she'd learned to use her gifts strategically. The ability to broadcast to every shifter consciousness in the kingdom made lying difficult for corrupt nobles. They'd cleaned out more than just Percival's conspiracy. The kingdom's entire power structure had been restructured, with representatives from all ranks now sitting on the council, not just highborn alphas. "Mama! Papa!" Marin's voice carried from the castle, urgent and excited. Baby Thomas is walking. Come see." They returned to find their youngest son, just turned 1 year old, wobbling on unsteady legs while a crowd of children cheered him on. He made it 3 steps before sitting down hard, but his face split into a triumphant grin that was pure madness. Sarah scooped him up, kissing his silver curls, and felt the completeness of this moment. Her family, her purpose, her home. That evening, as the sun set over the mountains, turning the sky gold and pink, Sarah stood in her chambers, looking at the wall where she'd hung Bet's preserved medallion. The tarnished metal that had revealed her bloodline now served as a reminder of everything she'd fought for. Magnus joined her, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. "What are you thinking?" "That I want Lyra to have this someday," Sarah said. "The medallion, the story, all of it. So she understands that strength isn't about power or titles. It's about choosing to help when you could look away. About standing up when you could bow down. About surviving when the world wants you to break. She'll understand," Magnus said. "You teach that lesson every day." Later, after the children were asleep and the castle had grown quiet, Sarah returned once more to the ancestral tree. She did this often, finding peace in the silent communion with something older and wiser than herself. She placed her hand on the bark and felt the familiar warmth. Then she did something she'd only recently learned. She reached through the tree's roots, through the network of lunastones scattered across the kingdom, and felt every Omega who slept safely tonight, every child who'd found sanctuary, every person who'd been given a second chance at life. Hundreds of consciousnesses brushed against hers. Not invasive, just present. A gentle reminder that she was never alone, and neither were they. "Thank you," she whispered to the goddess, to the tree, to whatever force had decided a cursed foundling deserved saving. For all of it, the pain and the joy, the endings and the beginnings. Thank you for teaching me that falling doesn't mean failing, that being broken just means you get to choose how you heal. White petals drifted down from the branches above, settling in her hair, on her shoulders, blessing her with their softness. And in that moment, standing beneath a tree that had been dead for 3 centuries until she'd given it life, Sarah understood the truth that had taken 6 years to fully accept. She wasn't the girl who'd been abandoned at these roots. She wasn't the servant who'd been beaten and starved. She wasn't even the terrified woman who'd nearly burned. She was Luna, mother, queen, teacher, the woman who'd taken her pain and transformed it into purpose, who'd taken her scars and made them into strength. The tree had bloomed for her once, but she bloomed for it every single day. In every child she taught, every Omega she saved, every life she touched with the lesson that survival was only the beginning. That real power came from choosing, again and again, to stand back up. And as the moon rose over the kingdom, casting silver light through white blossoms that would never stop flowering, Sarah smiled, because she'd learned the most important truth of all. Roots might determine where you started, but blossoms showed the world what you chose to become. The end.